Hello everyone and welcome back to our channel. In today's deep dive, we'll be exploring the life, career, and legacy of one of Hollywood's most influential, yet sometimes under-acknowledged filmmakers, Howard Hawks. Known as the Gray Fox of Hollywood, Hawks directed across multiple genres, from screwball comedies to film noir, westerns, gangster epics, and even musicals, and left an indelible mark on cinema history. So sit back, relax, and join us as we uncover the story of Howard Hawks, a cinematic architect whose effortless storytelling, sharp dialogue, and dynamic characters set the gold standard for generations to come. 1. Childhood and the making of an adventurer. Early life in Indiana. Howard Winchester Hawks was born on May 30th, 1896, in Goshen, Indiana. Some might say it was a somewhat unremarkable small town in America's Midwest, but for Hawks, this humble beginning was just the launch pad for the life of adventure and ambition he would go on to lead. He came from a wealthy family. His grandfather, C.W. Howard, was a successful industrialist in the paper manufacturing business. This financial security meant Hawks was never short on opportunities, a privilege that would factor prominently into his willingness to pursue risky interests. While many children with similar privileges might have chosen to live in leisure, Hawks was different. Even at a young age, he was fascinated by the mechanics of how things worked, specifically anything fast, loud, and dangerous. This included automobiles and airplanes, technologies that were emerging as the new frontiers of adventure in the early 20th century. The family's westward moves. Hawks's mother had fragile health, which prompted the family to move often. They oscillated between their home in Indiana, several locations in the Midwest and California. Eventually, in 1911, they settled in Pasadena, a part of the rapidly modernizing Los Angeles area. This was a fortuitous location for young Howard. Los Angeles in the early 1910s was a hub for car racing, early aviation, and all manner of technological experiments. As a teenager, he found himself surrounded by racing enthusiasts, daredevil pilots, and inventors. It was at this point that Hawks truly fell in love with speed. He immersed himself in building cars, fine-tuning engines, and racing on local tracks. He wasn't content to just watch from the sidelines. By his late teens, he was already a competent race car driver, known for his fearlessness and mechanical ingenuity, becoming a pilot. But Hawks didn't stop with cars. He also took to the skies. Aviation in the early 1900s was still in its infancy, an uncharted territory filled with both promise and peril. Think about the era of the Wright brothers, barnstorming shows, and fledgling military air corps. Hawks was enthralled by the idea of flight, training to become a pilot as soon as he was old enough. When the United States entered World War I, his aviation skills earned him a position as a U.S. Army Air Corps flight instructor. For Hawks, aviation was more than just a hobby. It was a passion that would shape both his personality and his films. His experiences training pilots and understanding the dangers of flying would become the backbone of some of his most thrilling movies, such as Only Angels Have Wings, 1939, and The Dawn Patrol, 1930, with a later version in 1938, though the 1930 version wasn't directed by Hawks. These were films that captured not just the excitement of aerial maneuvers, but also the camaraderie, risk, and psychological toll of putting oneself in danger day after day. Formative influences on filmmaking. All of these adventures, automobile races, airplane flights, and mechanical tinkering, would later inform Hawks's cinematic style. While many directors of his time studied storytelling through literature, theater, or the established norms of silent cinema, Hawks's education was different. He learned about pacing, tension, and energy from the roar of engines and the thrill of risk. His background gave him a naturalistic sense of action that would distinguish his work for decades to come. By the time he was in his early 20s, Hawks was already a man of considerable experience, someone who had tasted danger firsthand, understood physical risk, and relished technological innovation. These experiences, combined with his privileged upbringing, laid the groundwork for a career in filmmaking that would push boundaries and defy easy classification. 2. A family of connections and tragedy. The Hawks family's wealth and status. It wasn't just Hawks's parents who were successful. Multiple branches of his family tree were well connected. This meant that Howard had a built-in support system that reached into elite social circles. While many future filmmakers struggled to scrape by, taking low-paying gigs in Hollywood, Hawks had the financial independence to experiment and, if necessary, to fail, without it spelling personal disaster. Yet life wasn't all sunshine, even with the cushion of wealth. In 1911, tragedy struck the family when Howard's youngest sister died suddenly. This loss affected everyone and contributed to the family's decision to permanently settle in Pasadena, effectively positioning Howard in the heart of the burgeoning film industry that would soon become Hollywood. Siblings in the film industry. Interestingly, Howard Hawks wasn't the only one in his family drawn to the silver screen. His younger brother, Kenneth Hawks, also ventured into directing. The two formed a tight bond, sharing not just familial ties, but also a passion for movies and aviation. Tragically, Kenneth died in 1930 in a plane crash while filming aerial scenes, a moment that shook Howard deeply. This loss further instilled in him an awareness of how easily thrill-seeking could cross into tragedy, a theme that resonates in many of his films, where risk and daring stunts play central roles. Another brother, William Hawks, worked as a producer and talent agent. Through William's first marriage to silent film actress Bessie Love, the Hawks family found themselves right in the center of Hollywood's elite. Over time, these familial connections provided Howard Hawks with a unique advantage. He had the inside track on the movie business and access to prominent industry figures, marrying into Hollywood royalties. Howard Hawks himself had a direct link to Hollywood aristocracy through his first marriage. In 1928, he married Ethel Shearer, the sister of the famous actress Norma Shearer. This made Hawks the brother-in-law of Irving Thalberg, the legendary MGM producer. Thalberg became an ally in the industry, offering Hawks a sounding board and a pathway into bigger projects. Although these connections undoubtedly eased Hawks's entry into filmmaking, he wasn't merely a beneficiary of nepotism. He started from the ground up, working in the props department, learning about set design, and getting an up-close look at film production's nitty-gritty details. Unlike some who coast on family ties, Hawks proved his mettle by tackling hands-on technical work, which deepened his understanding of how films are made. Tragedie serve a driving force. The recurring theme of tragedy in Hawks's early life, his sister's death, later Kenneth's fatal crash, shaped his worldview. These events injected a sense of urgency and realism into his cinematic endeavors. Hawks didn't shy away from depicting danger or risk. He understood it intimately, whether in his gangster films, war dramas, or aviation stories. That authenticity of experience translated into gripping, believable narratives that enthralled audiences. To sum it up, Howard Hawks had the ideal blend of resources and hardships to forge a unique path. His family connections opened Hollywood's doors, but the tragedies and personal interests shaped the artistic vision he brought to the screen. This combination of privilege and pain would become part of the Hawks legend, a man who seemed to move effortlessly through Hollywood's upper echelons, yet carried a deep well of real-world experience that lent his work an unmatched authenticity. third rise to fame. A legendary career in Hollywood. From the props department to the director's chair after World War I, Hawks returned to California determined to make a name in the film industry. His mechanical background made him particularly suited for roles involving set construction and prop design. He built sets, tinkered with cameras, and absorbed every aspect of the movie-making process. This hands-on approach grounded him in the practicality of filming, something that would later inform his directorial style, emphasizing clean narratives and logical staging of action. He famously secured his early producing gig after lending money to Jack Warner, which resulted in a producing role on comedy shorts. This underscores how his family's wealth and his personal savvy dovetailed to accelerate his climb. By the mid-1920s, Hawks had gravitated to screenwriting and story editing, which gave him a strong foundation in narrative structure. Finally, in 1926, he directed his first feature, The Road to Glory, not to be confused with his later 1936 war film of the same name. While largely forgotten today, this silent era picture was Hawks's initial foray into a directorial career that would soon explode. Adapting to the talkies Hollywood in the late 1920s was in upheaval as silent films gave way to the new technology of synchronized sound. Many directors who excelled in silent storytelling struggled to adapt their visual grammar to the demands of spoken dialogue. Hawks, however, proved remarkably adaptable. He recognized that the essence of film was still storytelling. Sound was just another tool to deepen audience engagement. The arrival of the talkies also allowed Hawks to experiment with dialogue at breakneck speed, a hallmark that would define his screwball comedies and other genre films. Instead of laboring over the transition, he seemed to relish it, quickly establishing himself as a director who could handle any technical challenge. The HAWKSIAN style, across genres, with effortless storytelling. Scarface, 1932, challenging censorship. Hawks's big breakthrough in terms of public and critical attention came with Scarface, 1932, produced by Howard Hughes. This gritty gangster film, inspired by Al Capone's life, was unapologetically violent. Machine gun sequences, brutal killings, and the nihilistic rise and fall of its gangster protagonist shocked audiences. As expected, it also raised the hackles of censorship boards, forcing Hawks and Hughes to insert alternate endings and moralistic titles like Scarface, The Shame of a Nation. Despite these compromises, Scarface became a pioneering film in the gangster genre, influencing everything from The Godfather to Goodfellas. Hawks had proven that audiences had a hunger for raw, unfiltered storytelling, provided it was told with skill and flair. This success also solidified Hawks's distaste for intrusive censorship and studio interference, a conflict that would persist throughout his career. Screwball comedy, Genius Bringing Up Baby and His Girl, Friday. If Scarface announced Hawks as a formidable dramatist, then the screwball comedies of the 1930s and 1940s declared him a master of comedic timing. Two films in particular stand out: Bringing Up Baby, 1938, starring Cary Grant as a bumbling paleontologist and Katharine Hepburn as an eccentric socialite. Bringing Up Baby was a wild ride of mistaken identities, missing dinosaur bones, and a pet leopard named Baby. Although a box office flop at the time of its release, the film later gained acclaim for its rapid-fire dialogue and comedic absurdities. It's now hailed as a masterpiece of screwball comedy. His Girl, Friday, 1940. Adapted from the play The Front Page, this film famously turned the male lead into a female reporter, portrayed by Rosalind Russell. Opposite Cary Grant once again, the film featured overlapping dialogue, witty banter, and a combative yet flirtatious dynamic that broke new ground in romantic comedy. Hawks's decision to rewrite the central character as a woman effectively injected progressive gender dynamics, giving female characters agency and intellect on par with their male counterparts. These comedic efforts introduced the world to the HAWKSIAN woman, a smart, independent female character who more than held her own in a male-dominated environment. This template can be seen reverberating through countless films made in subsequent decades, influencing the portrayal of strong women in cinema. War dramas and film noir Hawks wasn't content to stay in the comfort zone of gangster flicks or screwball comedies. The 1940s saw him direct Sergeant York, 1941, a patriotic war drama starring Gary Cooper as real-life World War I hero Alvin York. The film was a massive hit and earned Hawks his only Best Director Oscar nomination. It demonstrated yet again his ability to tackle serious nationalistic themes while maintaining a strong narrative drive. He then pivoted to film noir with The Big Sleep, 1946, starring Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. Adapted from Raymond Chandler's novel, the film became an iconic entry in the noir canon. Bogart's portrayal of private detective Philip Marlowe, combined with the tantalizing chemistry between Bogart and Bacall, created an electric atmosphere that continues to captivate new generations of viewers. The plot was famously convoluted. Chandler himself reportedly couldn't answer certain plot questions, but Hawks's gift for mood, characterization, and crisp dialogue made the film a genre classic. Western epics. One of Hawks's greatest strengths was his refusal to be pigeonholed. In the late 1940s, he ventured into the Western genre, most notably with Red River, 1948. The film starred John Wayne in a more complex role than his usual stoic cowboy persona. Wayne played a hardened rancher, clashing with his adopted son, played by Montgomery Clift, on a cattle drive. The tension between the two characters added emotional depth to the epic scale, showcasing Hawks's ability to blend intense personal drama with sweeping action sequences. A decade later, Hawks helmed Rio Bravo, 1959, another Western that has since become a touchstone of the genre. Contrary to many Westerns that focused on grand showdowns, Rio Bravo was more character-driven, depicting a small group of individuals, led by Wayne, along with Dean Martin and Ricky Nelson, defending a town against bandits. The laid-back pacing and emphasis on camaraderie made it influential for later auteurs like Quentin Tarantino, who often cites it as a personal favorite. 5. Scandals and controversies. While Hawks's films were earning him critical acclaim and legions of fans, his personal life was far more tumultuous. His relationships with actresses, battles with censors, and clashes with Hollywood's elite form a separate but equally fascinating narrative, one that reveals a man both brilliant and domineering. War with the censors, the aftermath of Scarface. We've already touched on how Scarface, 1932, landed Hawks in hot water with censorship boards. The original cut was deemed too violent, too sympathetic to criminals, and too bleak in its ending. Hawks resisted making changes, but eventually had to comply with demands to depict the gangster's demise in a more humiliating fashion and to add disclaimers that crime doesn't pay. This battle left Hawks deeply resentful of interference. It arguably paved the way for his later rebellious streak when dealing with studios, ensuring he negotiated for as much creative control as possible. Even though Scarface became a cult classic, the experience taught Hawks that pushing boundaries would always come at a cost, a lesson he would apply repeatedly in future works. The Lauren Bacall saga. Perhaps the most well-known controversy involving Hawks was his relationship with actress Lauren Bacall. Then just 19 years old, Bacall was plucked from obscurity by Hawks, who personally coached her to lower her voice, adopt a sultry persona, and become the embodiment of his ideal leading lady. He even modeled her character in To Have and Have Not, 1944, on his second wife, Nancy Slim Keith, nicknaming Bacall Slim in the film. Yet, Hawks's carefully orchestrated plan unraveled when Bacall and her co-star Humphrey Bogart fell in love on set. Hawks was reportedly furious, feeling that Bacall was betraying the creation he had molded. He threatened to destroy her career if she chose Bogart over his controlling mentorship. Bacall, however, stood firm, marrying Bogart in 1945 and forging one of Hollywood's most iconic romances. This marked a major blow to Hawks's ego and revealed the fragility of the power he wielded over his protégés, a pattern of control. Bacall was neither the first nor last actress Hawks attempted to shape into his vision of the perfect woman. He often cast young, beautiful performers, giving them career-making roles, while also seeking a level of personal control that many found suffocating. Some, like Bacall, escaped his influence by carving out their own paths or by allying with powerful co-stars or studio heads. Others weren't so lucky and saw their potential fizzle when Hawks lost interest or deemed them too difficult to manage. Actresses like Dolores Moran found their roles reduced when they no longer held Hawks's favor. Others, like Joan Crawford, rumored to have had a brief affair with him, were too strong-willed to become malleable under his directorial vision. Carole Lombard, known for her comedic genius, openly joked about Hawks's authoritarian streak, quipping that he wanted women to act like men and men to act like they didn't care. Chicum personal relationships and marriages. Hawks was married 3 times, and each union tells us something different about the phases of his life and career. While his wives often epitomize the stylish, witty HAWKSIAN woman, these relationships were far from tranquil. Ethel Shearer, 1928 to 1940. Howard Hawks's first marriage was to Ethel Shearer, the younger sister of famed actress Norma Shearer. This marriage linked Hawks to the illustrious Thalberg family. At first it seemed like a beneficial union. Ethel's family connections bolstered Hawks's social standing, and Hawks's burgeoning career as a director gave her access to Hollywood's upper crust. However, Hawks's infidelity soon took a toll. While Ethel struggled with health issues, Hawks indulged in numerous affairs. The marriage ultimately broke down in 1940. Although the split was bitter, Ethel never publicly disparaged Hawks, perhaps recognizing that his restless nature made him ill-suited for monogamy. Nancy Slim Keith, 1941 to 1949. If Ethel Shearer came from a Hollywood dynasty, Nancy Slim Keith was the high society counterpart, an emblem of sophistication, style, and upper-class poise. Slim became a muse for Hawks. He modeled Bacall's character in To Have and Have Not on her. She possessed the kind of cool, confident glamour that Hawks adored. Yet their marriage was fiery. Slim wasn't the type to silently endure Hawks's affairs. She retaliated with her own, and their relationship deteriorated into a battlefield of jealousy and resentment. The final blow came when Slim discovered Hawks cheating with one of her friends. They divorced in 1949, and she later married Hollywood agent Leland Hayward, remaining a fixture in elite social circles. Hawks, meanwhile, carried on searching for his next muse, Dee Hartford, 1953 to 1959. By the time he met Dee Hartford, Hawks was in his late 50s, still drawn to beauty, youth, and malleable personalities. Dee was a former model and aspiring actress, much younger than Hawks. The marriage in 1953 followed the familiar pattern. Hawks attempted to craft her into a cinematic icon that fit his mold. However, Dee never quite caught fire in Hollywood, nor did she step into the spotlight as flamboyantly as Nancy Keith had. Hawks's persistent infidelities again led to the marriage's demise in 1959. After this third divorce, Hawks never remarried, though he remained involved in various relationships, often with younger women, throughout his remaining years. If anything, the pattern reinforced that Hawks could never be truly contained within a traditional marriage. The final chapters. A man who wouldn't stop slowing pace in the 1960s. As Hawks moved into the 1960s, Hollywood was changing. The old studio system was breaking down, and a new wave of auteur directors like Stanley Kubrick, John Frankenheimer, and soon the film brats of the 1970s would shift the landscape. Hawks still directed, but not with the prolific energy of his earlier decades. Titles like El Dorado, 1966, and Rio Lobo, 1970, revisited the Western framework he had perfected with Rio Bravo. While these later Westerns were well crafted, they didn't carry the same innovative spark. Critics noted that Hawks was treading familiar ground, though audiences remained generally receptive to his signature blend of camaraderie and understated action, recognition, and influence. In 1974, Hawks received an honorary Academy Award, belatedly recognizing the monumental impact he had on American cinema. This was a significant moment because, despite his many classics, Hawks had never earned the industry's highest honor in competition. Many argue that he was overshadowed by more flamboyant directors, like Alfred Hitchcock or Orson Welles, who courted public attention with strong personal brands. Hawks, by contrast, was more reserved, and his style was so seamlessly integrated into his films that some viewers didn't realize how meticulously crafted his work truly was. That said, younger filmmakers, critics, and historians were increasingly citing Hawks as a key influence. François Truffaut and the French New Wave directors praised him for his genre versatility and narrative economy. Quentin Tarantino frequently cites Rio Bravo as a prime example of how to build tension and camaraderie in a single location. The Coen brothers have often referenced Hawks's screwball comedies as a model for comedic timing and rapid-fire dialogue. Battling Parkinson's disease. By the 1970s, Hawks faced a personal battle that no amount of wealth or industry influence could mitigate: Parkinson's disease. Known for its debilitating impact on motor skills, Parkinson's undercut Hawks's physical autonomy. For a man who prided himself on control over his films, his cast, and his personal life, this was a uniquely cruel challenge. Even as his body betrayed him, Hawks's mind remained sharp, and he continued to develop projects and advise younger filmmakers when possible. A quiet end. Despite his slowing pace, Hawks never fully retired in the conventional sense. In December 1977, the 81-year-old director suffered a fall at his home, which led to complications exacerbating his already fragile state. This fall proved to be the final blow, and on December 26, 1977, Howard Hawks passed away. True to his understated nature, he hadn't orchestrated any grand Hollywood farewell. His ashes were scattered in the desert, a symbolic nod to the countless westerns and outdoor adventures that had defined so much of his filmography. 8. The HAWKSIAN legacy: timeless storytelling. Howard Hawks's legacy endures primarily through his films, many of which stand the test of time thanks to their crisp pacing, dynamic characters, and universal themes. Whether it's the lightning-fast banter in His Girl Friday, the nail-biting tension of The Big Sleep, or the simmering camaraderie of Rio Bravo, Hawks's work still feels fresh. He had a knack for transcending the era in which a film was made, favoring a clarity of storytelling that resonates just as strongly decades later. The HAWKSIAN woman. One of the most cited aspects of Hawks's filmography is the concept of the HAWKSIAN woman. These characters, epitomized by actresses like Katharine Hepburn in Bringing Up Baby or Rosalind Russell in His Girl Friday, are strong, witty, and fiercely independent. They don't serve merely as romantic interests. They shape the story's direction, often matching or surpassing the male protagonist in cleverness and resilience. This portrayal was groundbreaking at a time when many Hollywood films relegated women to passive roles. While Hawks's real-life treatment of actresses might have been fraught with control issues, on screen, he gifted them with some of the most memorable and empowered roles of the classic era. Genre mastery and innovation. Hawks's name is attached to multiple seminal films across varied genres: Scarface for gangster films, Bringing Up Baby and His Girl Friday, for screwball comedy, The Big Sleep for noir, Red River and Rio Bravo for westerns, and even Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, 1953, in musical comedy, though he co-directed or shared credit in some musical contexts. The ability to move seamlessly between such different styles is extremely rare. In doing so, Hawks set precedents for filmmakers who aspired to break free from the constraints of any single genre. Modern director influences. It's almost impossible to count the number of modern directors who cite Hawks as an influence. John Carpenter has often spoken about Hawks's model of tight, character-focused storytelling being a key inspiration for his horror and action films. Quentin Tarantino includes Rio Bravo on his personal top films list, praising its sense of claustrophobic tension and banter. The comedic stylings of the Coen brothers owe a debt to Hawks's quick dialogue transitions and ability to handle complex comedic set pieces with ease. In many film schools, Hawks is taught not just as an important historical figure, but as a master craftsman whose approach to story structure, dialogue, and character can be studied and replicated by aspiring directors. His style, often referred to as invisible directing, focuses on making the camera serve the story rather than calling attention to the filmmaker. This approach has become a foundational principle in classic Hollywood storytelling, making Hawks a perennial reference in discussions of the auteur theory, oddly enough, since his style is more subtle than flamboyant directors like Hitchcock or Wells. Critical reappraisal. During Hawks's active years, he was sometimes overshadowed by directors with more showy techniques. Critics of the time praised or panned his films, without always recognizing the consistent brilliance that tied them together. However, in the latter half of the 20th century, critical reevaluation placed him in the pantheon of great American directors. Auteur critics in France, like those from Cahiers du Cinéma, championed Hawks as a prime example of an auteur who, despite working within the studio system, managed to imbue each project with a personal vision and style. This reappraisal shaped the way film historians now look at Hawks's work. What once seemed like commercial genre pictures are now dissected for their thematic continuity, their subversive treatment of gender roles, and their crisp, understated visual language. As we've journeyed through the life and work of Howard Hawks, certain key themes emerge: a restless thirst for adventure, a passion for mechanical precision, a flair for rapid-fire dialogue, and an insistence on controlling his cinematic world, even if that sometimes spilled over problematically into his personal relationships. Hawks was a mass of contradictions, a champion of strong on-screen women but often controlling and proprietary toward actresses in real life, a man who thrived on risk, racing, flying, yet consistently delivered commercial successes, an understated personality, yet an undisputed legend among his peers. Though he passed away in 1977, Hawks' films have aged beautifully and continue to captivate new fans. There's a reason a film like His Girl Friday can still elicit laughs from modern audiences. The wit and energy are timeless. There's a reason that Rio Bravo resonates with action aficionados. The tension and character dynamics remain evergreen. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the life of Howard Hawks, don't forget to hit the like button to let us know we're doing a good job. Subscribe to our channel for more in-depth explorations of cinema history. Ring that notification bell to be the first to know when we post new content. As always, thank you for joining us on this cinematic journey through Hollywood's golden age. From the gangster grit of Scarface to the comedic genius of His Girl Friday, from the noir shadows of The Big Sleep to the western camaraderie of Rio Bravo, Howard Hawks has shown us that a truly great storyteller can thrive anywhere, anytime, and in any genre. We'll see you in the next video.